Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a new episode of the No I.D podcast. I have here legend, author, writer, speaker, comedian. You've he's he was Comic View. He was Def Comedy Jam before Def Comedy Jam came around. He's put on careers as you know, some of the biggest names: Jamie Foxx, Yvette Wilson, Buddy Lewis, D.L. Hughley. He was everything you can do. Author of Blacks on Black Comedy. That was my mother up there yelling. She's so excited that I'm introducing. I have no other than Darryl D'Militant Littleton. How you feeling today?
Good. How you doing, Jerome?
I'm doing well, man. I'm not gonna complain. I do appreciate this interview. I can't tell you how how much I really do appreciate it. You are one of the people that I've actually studied in comedy. You, Michael Collier, Buddy Lewis, Moms Mabley. The list is going to continue as well too.
I'm in good company. Okay, cool. When you mention moms, it's like, oh, okay. Buddy Lewis is like, all right. No, I say that because I started with Buddy Lewis. He's a peer, and it's funny. I came up with a lot of people who were like really big name, Jamie and so forth, Oscar winners and all that. But I saw an interview with Hope Flood, and she said it pretty correctly. Once you've known these people and you came up with them, it doesn't matter what they do. You just still look at them as, your peers or your friends or whatever. I have peers that have done really amazing things, and I have peers that have done stuff that hasn't gotten that much recognition, but they're all the same. Yeah. So I don't get all, I guess, starstruck on. Now, that's why I said when you mentioned moms, that impressed me, because I'm impressed by what I like to call real legends. We have new legends now because generations have to keep moving forward. But I grew up on people like Moms Mabley and Pigmeat Markham and Red Fox and Slappy White, and Robin Harris was a mentor of mine. Robin Harris, Rodney Winfield, John Witherspoon, Robert Townsend. I'm not trying to leave anybody out. Simply Marvelous. Helped me out a lot. So Brad Sanders. So I grew up on people like that. So to me, those are legends. So when people talk about the people in my generation being legends, it's true because generations pass.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I saw a couple of your YouTube clips, and one that stuck out to me, I want to say, was back in 2019 when you actually got white Trump supporters told. You broke down.
Yeah, I remember that.
It was about 10-15 minutes, and I watched that clip. I was at work, I watched that. I came home from work, I rewatched it, and I'm like, man, this guy is genius. He's broke it down to a point where you have no choice but to listen and comprehend and and fathom it and go back and rewatch it again. And you talked about, how blacks got into comedy back when the minstrel started. And from there, you got me more into Moms Mabley. I didn't understand back then, but now that I've gotten to comedy myself, I have to pay homage to those that came before me, because you and a lot of people have actually paved the way for comedians such as myself and the Jamie Foxxes and so on and so on. So I do appreciate you.
Well, it's weird. I was talking to somebody about this the other day. What I am, because I'm recognized right now as the #1 Black comedy historian, and some people recognize me as the #1 historian. There's another guy named Cliff Nesterhoff. I'm a board member of the Comedy Hall of Fame. He's a board member of the National Comedy Hall of Fame. We're located in New York. His office, I think, is in they're stationed in Philadelphia. We've both written books covering comedy. If you read my books, I've got 3 of them on the history of comedy, Black comedians on Black comedy, the book you mentioned earlier. I've got a book called Comedians Laugh, Be a Lady. And I also have this book right here. This is an encyclopedia of comedy. It's called This Day in Comedy. the Ethnic Encyclopedia of Comedy, and I think, let's see, Franklin Ajay did the introduction, and Marshall Warfield did the forward on it. So this is comprehensive too. What I was going to say is comedy, tracing comedy history is brand new, really. There was a guy who came before me. His name was Mel Watkins, and he has a book called On the Real Side. It's got Richard Pryor picking his nose on the cover. It's funny. It's a great book. I read that book, and that made me want to delve more into comedy history. And what it is basically this. That's why I say I'm brand new. There haven't been any Black comedy historians before Mel Watkins, and then me, and then whoever comes after me or whatever. Because Black comedy is relatively new. Blacks came over here in 1619, but yet Black comedy didn't start until 1820. So we had been here for 200 years. Nobody was trying to make fun of us. It was a white guy named Thomas Rice. He put on blackface in 1820 and started the minstrel movement. Minstrel entertainment was the first American art form. There was nothing, everything had come over from Europe. All the music, the dance, the fashion, everything had been European in America up until that point. Jazz wasn't even around, which was the original music. That didn't come around until I think 1900, 1901 with King Oliver in New Orleans. And I might be wrong about the origin because I think it was started in Kansas City. But in any case, jazz didn't start until the next century. So 1820, this white guy, Thomas Rice, started the minstrel movement. Other white entertainers jumped on board. It was big until like 1840, and then people were getting tired of it. And then they did what I like to call the original Kings of Comedy. You had 4 white minstrels who had followings, but they didn't work together. So what they did was they band together, and they called themselves the Virginia Minstrels. You can look this up, the Virginia Minstrels, and that's what started the 4-man configuration. Minstrels used to be like just one person would be on a big show where they would have like singing and opera and dancing and magicians and jugglers and all this other stuff. You'd have that one minstrel come up and do his thing and then leave. What the Virginia Minstrels did was they revolutionized the format. They had a plantation background. They put money into production. They had a plantation background. They had bales of hay, watermelons on stage. I mean, they made it look like a plantation. And then they would go out and they would do their thing, you know. And the thing about white minstrels, they said putting on the black face enabled them to release all their inhibitions, so they could jump around and be loose and free and limber and all that, because they couldn't do it as white guys. They had to be black to do that. It wasn't until 1860 that Black people got into show business. So we had been in the United States for what, 2.5 centuries before we got into show business. So comedy for Black people is relatively new. And we started off as minstrels. The way I do comedy and other people do comedy now, stand-up comedy, that didn't come around until the 1950s. At the earliest, the 1940s. And still a lot of people didn't do stand up. What they were doing was telling jokes. I'm sorry I don't have this to hold up. I have a collection, Laugh Records collection called Black and Blue. It's got Red Fox, Slappy White, LaWanda Page, Leroy and Skillet, Jimmy Lynch, Wild Man Steve, Jimmy Thompson, is Ronaldo Ray. It's got all the old comics from that era of the 60s and the 70s that recorded with Laugh Records, and they commissioned me to do a collection on it, which came out 2014. It's like 4 CD collection, but they were telling jokes in the 70s. They weren't doing stand-up. They were still telling jokes. In the 60s, Lenny Bruce, Dick Gregory, Cosby, Pryor, Mort Saul, they were doing stand-up, Joan Rivers, and that was like in the 1960s. The coin the phrase stand-up comedy, that phrase wasn't coined until 1966. The comics that came before me, and this is really important, because this is what got me into writing or caring about Black comedy history. I was overseas, and I was just talking before we started recording. I was talking to your father and your mother about, Black troops and soldiers overseas and Korean War and Vietnam and all that. Well, I had done, as I was telling your father, I did Korea and Japan. I went over there and performed for those troops from 1991 all the way to like 2003. I was just going back and forth and back and forth. And when I came back one time, I was talking to a comic who had been doing comedy as long as me. I thought he knew as much as I did. He had never heard of Bert Williams. And Bert Williams was the first Black comic. Him and his partner, George Walker, they were the first Black comics on Broadway. They were the first Black comics to have a national dance craze. The cakewalk, if you ever heard of the cakewalk, that came from Williams and Walker. You can Google it. It was a national dance craze before the twist and the gigolo and everything else people do before the Cabbage Patch Kid, and all that. There was the cakewalk, and that was one of the first original dances in the United States. That was Williams and Walker. And they had a play on Broadway. They were the first Blacks to have a play on Broadway, first Blacks on film, in movies. So these guys were really important. Walker died. Williams went on and did the Ziegfeld Follies, which was big way back then. And he was the highest paid entertainer. He was Black. A lot of people didn't want to work with him. Famous entertainers from back then, Walter Brennan, Al Jolson, Eddie Cantor, they all said he was the best guy to wear blackface. The problem with Bert Williams was he was smart. He was sophisticated. He listened to opera records. He had a smoking jacket. He smoked a pipe, and he had a wine cellar. He was one of those Black guys. He wasn't just a hood brother. He was, what he was, as far as I was concerned, is he was a man who was Black, not a Black man. And there's a big difference. We're all men. But this, in America, you have to remember that you're a Black man versus you're a man who's Black. When I go overseas, when I was in Korea and Japan, Asia, Europe, I never had to think about being Black. It never came up. I go into a restaurant or I go into a store, nobody's looking at me funny. Nobody's looking like, can you afford to be here, or you're gonna steal from me or anything like that. Stigma wasn't there when I was there. So and I think most Black people who have been overseas will say it, that that's a place you feel free. Even in your own country, I don't care how big you get in the United States. You've had congressmen and politicians and people who are recognizable athletes who still get pulled over by the cops, who still get a gun pointed to their head. So it doesn't really matter to a degree how high you rise in the United States as far as notoriety and fame and power and all that. You can still get thrown on the ground like any other brother just out there on the street. We're all the same according to the system. A white man can go above his class. And don't get me wrong, a Black man can go above the class system, but when you got a gun pointed at you, you're not above the class system. You're as helpless as anybody else. You're as helpless as a guy living out of a trash can. So all your work and effort. So to me, knowing about Black history is important for the next generation and the generation after that and the generation after that, to know who these people were and where they came from. That's why I said, I'm a new oddity. I didn't grow up even knowing, number one, there wasn't really a thing called Black comedy when I was coming up. It was comedy. One of my favorite comics was Groucho Marx. I used to love W.C. Fields, and I still do. If you put on an old Harold Lloyd silent movie, I'm there, I'm watching it. To me, comedy has nothing to do with race, and it never did. I grew up on all kind of comedy. I grew up on Paul Rodriguez. I watched his stuff on The Tonight Show. I watched everybody. So Black comedy is new in the sense of it's always been there, but it didn't blow up until the comedy boom of the 90s, which I was part of. Before that, there was only really a handful of Black comics with national recognition that America even cared about. And the book you mentioned, Black Comedians on Black Comedy, I wrote a book before that. It was about the comedy scene that nobody had seen yet, because it was the Black comedy scene. And Jamie was in it, Cedric was in it, Dio was in it, Aries Spears was in it. I wrote stories about a lot of comics that went on in the next 2 or 3 years to get fame and notoriety. But at the time, in the late 1990s, I think it was, nobody had heard of these guys. Nobody knew, nobody cared about that book at all. It wasn't until I put it in a historical perspective, because I was just writing about an era. Once I put it in historical, I had 4 publishers that wanted to do a book on Black comedy once my agent went out and shopped the idea. And one wanted to do one on the 70s, and one wanted to do, I think, the Harlem Renaissance era. There was only one that said, do the whole history of Black comedy. If he does that, we'll do the book. And I said, that's the one I want to do. I want to do the whole history. I don't want to do just a block. If I can't do this new block nobody cares about, I'll do the full thing and lead up to this new block. So that's why in Black Comedians on Black Comedy, you do have Cedric, you do have Dio, you do have Kevin Hart at the end of the book, which nobody had ever written about Kevin Hart before. When I wrote about Kevin Hart, he had just came off a number of failures. His TV show had failed, Soul Plane had been a disaster. And we were able to talk about that candidly. And the reason Kevin is the last entry in the book is because he said something that was really important to me, that people can hate on him and talk about all the stuff that he has failed at. Meanwhile, he's working on new stuff so he can succeed. So, and his thing was, I'm going to be more than a comic. I'm going to be more than an actor. I'm going to be more than a producer. He wanted to stretch out his tentacles. So number one, you're never unemployed. But number two, you're becoming a real artist. Now, you would have some people say that Kevin Hart is not the funniest comic right now. What difference does that make? Kevin Hart, and I want to explain this, Kevin Hart is not the best stand-up right now. And I go back to, what difference does that make? Kevin Hart is what Bob Hope was. Bob Hope was an ambassador for comedy. There were other comics during the Bob Hope era that were a little more in tune with comedy or a little better than Bob Hope. But what Bob Hope did was, he had a national platform. People could see him and say, wow, I like comedy. They can see him on a special doing stand-up monologue and say, wow, I like that. Maybe I'll go to a comedy club and watch comedy. That's what Kevin is. Kevin does comedy about his family. Kevin is not T.K. Kirkland. Kevin is not Corey Holcomb. Kevin is not what Paul Mooney was. Kevin is not the kind of comedy where you would go in and you are like a fan of comedy, or you get blown away by it because how deep and intricate and hilarious, but yet insightful it is. Kevin is like Kevin's like being in a hospital and the stuff they give you that you can handle and that you can deal with, that your system can tolerate. And then once you're well enough to tolerate that, then you can go on and tolerate a pastrami sandwich or a pizza, or whiskey. Mm-hmm. But you're not going to get that in the hospital. And I'm not saying Kevin is for the sick. What I'm saying is Kevin is an ambassador of comedy. If you watch Kevin Hart the first time, you're not going to be offended. You're not going to be upset. And it will probably draw you more into comedy, and maybe Black comedy, than if it was somebody else. If you got introduced by Corey Holcomb talking about how women don't stand a chance, or T.K. Kirkland are talking about sex and all that, you may be offended by that. You may walk away. So you need people like Kevin, and I'm glad you got him, because that makes my job not easier, but it makes my job last. Everybody can't be talking shit. Excuse my lingo.
You good?
Oh, okay. I didn't know if I curse or not.
No, you good, cause
Oh, okay. I just haven't naturally done it. It hadn't come up. I mean, I curse usually to make a point, and I haven't had to do that. So
you good because I about 2 months ago I did the Laugh Factory Chocolate Sundays First Impressions Laugh Factory, and they're talking about eating ass and I done had sex with this baby mom. I'm like, I can't really talk about that, you know. And I was up there and I literally was talking about me flunking out of school because of IT and me working at a credit union, my dating life. That's literally what I was just talking about. I said, I guess you got to find your niche. So I can't do I can't go up there and just get into the politics of eating ass and stuff like that.
Don't. Here's the thing about comedy, and I'm not going to say the comics talking about eating ass are wrong. Comedy is based on the uniqueness of the individual. That's why I don't like hack comics. And when I say hack, I'm talking about comics who steal material. Don't get me wrong, we've all done it. When we first start, a lot of us don't know no better. So we take jokes that we saw work. And there used to be an era where everybody did the same joke. Leroy Daniels did a joke, and I love this joke. So I'm gonna tell it. Okay. We were so broke that my daddy went outside one Christmas with his shotgun, shot it in the air, came back and told us Santa Claus committed suicide. Now, it's an old joke. Red Fox has done that joke. All those guys used to do that joke back then. But once Comic View, Def Jam, and the comedy boom came in, you had to be individual. We can't all, because you were watching dozens of comedians every doggone week. We can't all be doing the same jokes. Everybody, and none of us were trying to do the same jokes. When we found somebody was doing our joke that we wrote, not a stock joke that we got from an album, when we're trying to figure comedy out. No, a joke you wrote, put them up. We would fight. Our generation, we didn't tolerate it. I could name you so many combinations of fights where and Buddy Lewis's name would come up. So Buddy had a fight, Pierre, Lester Berry, AJ Sanders. It didn't, male, female, you steal jokes, man. People would fight. That was back, because comedy is still the wild, wild west. But yeah, no, I don't like hack comics. What you did at Chocolate Sunday, continue to do you, because nobody else is you. Nobody has lived from day one up till today with your experiences. So you can talk about stuff that nobody else can talk about. And don't get me wrong, somebody can go up there and talk about licking ass in a certain way that maybe nobody else has done, but that's only going to take you so far. And don't get me wrong, Andrew Dice Clay blew up with some bullshit. A lot of comics blow up with gimmicky bullshit. So I never tell a comic, don't do this. Who the hell am I? I'm not God. I didn't create this and I don't control this. So the public goes for what they like. But what I do tell comics is, do you. It sounds cliche, but it's absolutely true. Richard Pryor became the Richard Pryor that we knew and loved because he was doing Bill Cosby. He was going on TV shows. He was wearing the sweaters and the V-necks and all that. And he was basically doing clean comedy the way Cosby was doing it. He was talking about his family, and he was, but not too deep, because his family were prostitutes and madams and, pimps and all that. But he talked more about general stuff. He would do Cosby antics and, the facial expressions and all that. And him and Cosby were friends. And Cosby said, man, you got to stop doing me. And Pryor was like, I'm making too much money doing you. I will not stop. Until one day he was in Vegas, and I forget where he was playing. I think it was the Aladdin. He was on stage, and it hit him that he wasn't being Richard Pryor. I mean, he could keep going up and doing this and making money, but eventually, the thing about being a stand-up comic is you're professionally funny, which means there's days you ain't gonna want to do it. Anybody can be funny. Everybody's funny at one time or another, but can you do it over and over and over and over? And the days you're sick, the days you're tired, the days you don't feel funny, can you still do it? That's being professionally funny. You still got to do it because it is a job. It is an obligation to your audience. Richard Pryor was feeling the pressure. It's like somebody, you murder somebody and it's weighing on your conscience because you can't tell nobody, but it's eating away at you. And it was eating away at him that he was not being him on stage. And he was having to go up and put on this mask of being this clean comic, and he wasn't a clean person. And it wasn't until he became who he was, he started talking like he was off stage, acting like he was off stage, subject matter that he would talk about off stage. Until he did that, he wasn't great. And I like I said, I mentioned earlier, Robin Harris was a mentor of mine. And Robin Harris, what you saw on stage, he was the same guy off stage. And I was lucky because I was able to see that. When I first started off, I was doing like a lot of comics. You do what you think is funny, not what you know is funny. And that's what you should go by. Your instinct is what you know should be funny. Like, for instance, if you and your friends are sitting around and you say something funny and everybody's laughing, I mean, tears coming out, jumping up, running around, laughing like that, that's your material. You find a way to take that moment and put it on stage versus sitting down writing a joke. Jokes are hard to write because if they're not organic, if they didn't come from anywhere, you're just grabbing something out of the universe, out of the blue, and trying to make it funny. I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm an expert on comedy, but I don't know what's funny until I see it, until I think it. I can think something's really funny, and I'll be honest with you, right now, about 9 out of 10, 7 out of 10 times, I'm right, because I've been doing it for 30 years. So I can pretty much say, this is funny, that's funny. But then, like I said, you got those 3 times where I'm absolutely wrong, because I'm not everybody. My taste doesn't encompass everybody's taste. So people who liked Pee Wee Herman, I may personally not like Pee Wee Herman, but there's a whole audience for people that like Pee Wee Herman. So you can't have gatekeepers of comedy. The audience should be the only gatekeeper. It shouldn't be a producer, it shouldn't be a director, a studio head that says, this person's funny, this person ain't. Let's test them in front of an audience, even if it's a test audience, even if we just got to show footage and see if people think this person's funny. But then I want to point this out to people who are in comedy or who want to get into comedy. It's show business, and you can get as good as you want to as a stand-up. I'm going to push another book real quick. I have another book, How to Be Funny, The Essential Comedy Handbook. A lot of stuff I'm talking about right now is in this book. A lot of stuff is in this book that I'm not have the time to talk about, getting agents, contracts. And this doesn't tell you necessarily how to get laughs. It does, but it shows you how to be a professional comedian or how to be professionally funny. This works for lawyers. This works for clergymen. This works for politicians because it gives you the discipline of being funny. But what I was saying is our business, our side of it is political. So you want to be cool with most of the comics you work with. Being human beings, that's impossible. There's people that are gonna rub you the wrong way. You're gonna rub them the wrong way. Don't be no punk for nobody and all that stuff. But as much as you can, try to get along with your peers. If you can help a peer and it doesn't hurt you, help a peer, because it's all a circle. It all comes back. Like the people you're working with right now, Jerome, that you're coming up with in comedy, those are what they call your tanda, your class, your classmates, your colleagues. You guys are the class of 2020, 2021, 2022. You guys will always know and remember each other. You'll remember the people that went before you. You'll remember the people that came after you. You guys will have a certain bond. I have that bond with Cedric the Entertainer, and he started in St. Louis. I started in California. We did the road together, didn't know each other from Adam. We got put together on the road, and then we ended up doing Comic View together, and we started around the same time. So even though I wasn't in the clubs with him like I was, say, D.L. Hughley or T.K. Kirkland or Jamie Foxx out in California, we're all part of the same class. So we're all part of that same generation, and that's a bond of comedy. But politically, what I'm saying is, by being cool to your peers, Cedric helped me keep my job at BET. They were getting ready to fire me after I had written for D.L. Hughley, and I was just a writer. And they said, well, you got to do more than write. We need writer producers. And I said, well, I can produce, because I had already done my own show. They didn't know that. But they said, well, we don't know. We'll check with Cedric. And they didn't know me and Cedric knew each other. So Cedric said, don't worry. I really don't need you to write for me, but I'll let them know that I want you to write for me, and that way you keep your job, because we were friends. So you want to keep those kind of relationships. You don't want to be the kind of comic acting like you better than every other comic.
Thanks.
And offending people and pissing off your peers, because they can help you. Thanks to Cedric, I stayed there during his term, some more, Don D.C. Curry and Montana Taylor. I stayed there for 4 seasons, thanks to Cedric the Entertainer. I was able to do a lot of work there, learn a lot, and make a lot of connections, and was able to go and do a lot of road stuff based on putting comics on who I knew deserved to be on, and they had rooms around the country. And next thing I know, when I was off during the breaks, then I was working the road for the people that I had helped out. So, and also another thing politically, and a lot of people don't like to talk about it, there's the flesh trade that goes on in comedy. And there's the putting on dresses and all this other stuff. You're gonna run across people who are gonna want you to do stuff you ain't gonna wanna necessarily do to move forward in your career. I never tell nobody what to do in their personal life, but if you go in with open eyes, don't be surprised if somebody says, give me some head, or put on this dress, or let's go ahead and worship the devil, or whatever it may be that ain't got shit to do with telling jokes. That's up to you to make that decision. I've always said no. They wanted me. Nobody asked me, I was never asked to put on a dress. I was asked to portray a gay character, which I thought was just overly stereotypically gay. They wanted way, way out there, and I didn't do it. And it wasn't that I did not attempt to do the acting part of it, but they just said, you're just not gay enough. I said, sorry about that. My acting's not that good. They wanted they wanted like the gay parade kind of gay guy with the gold and the frail and the shirt off and all. It's like, well, no, that's not me. I can't pull that one off. Sorry. I was asked to coon, and I refused. Now, I did refuse to do that. That was a blatant refusal. I didn't even try to compromise. They wanted me to call myself Whoopsie Woolly, and this was from the Comedy Store. And so I refused to do that, and that was from the owner of the Comedy Store after telling me, I can blow you up and make you a big star, but we're going to call you Whoopsie Woolly. And it's like, well, then I'm not going to be a big star. I'm not going to be Whoopsie Woolly. You might as well call me Step and Fetch It. You might as well call me Sleep and Eat. You might as well call me Burrhead Nigga. I'm not going to do any of that, because that will live forever. I know what you're doing. You're offering me, I'll blow you up. You'll make all kind of money, nigga. You'll have all the black tail. You can, all the cars. Yeah, that's cool. But then once all that subsides, keep in mind, your average career lasts 5 to 10 years. If you doubt me, think about who was hot 5 years ago. Think who was hot 10 years ago. And they ain't hot now. Very few people survive. Eddie Murphy is amazing because he's been around for 30 years. He was around before I got into comedy, and he's still around. But think about who was around in 1982 when Eddie did his first movie. Who was hot back then? Come on. Who was hot 10 years ago? And I'm not saying this in a negative way, but Cat Williams was hot 10, 15 years ago. Nobody was talking about Kevin Hart. Nobody's really talking about Cat now. They're talking about Kevin Hart. 10 years from now, probably won't be talking about Kevin. You're going to be talking about somebody else. So, and don't get me wrong, Cat Williams is continuing to work. He's an amazing comedian. I'll be the first to say that. Funny as hell, underrated, believe it or not. As much as we know how funny he is, he's underrated because of the opportunities he did not take advantage of or that were held back from him. But the point is, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, Cat was hot as hell. There was nobody there. I worked for him, so I know how hot he was. The guy could walk through a casino with his dog. Nobody was able to do that. He was like Red Auerbach. They used to let Red Auerbach smoke cigars in places where you couldn't smoke. So when you're so big, you can break the rules. So Cat was breaking rules all over the place. But now is now. And right now, like I said, Kevin Hart is the hottest thing out there. So if you go back 10 years, you got Cat, you got a few other people. You go back 20 years, you got some people that ain't even on the radar no more. So what I was going to say is Cat continues to work. Cat makes a lot of money. Cat makes more money in one night than most people make in 1 year. So let's not cry no tears because everybody ain't talking about him no more. He's good. But he's at that point where you had a career and you were hot and now you're established. And he's in a position where all comics want to be, all entertainers want to be. You want to be where people are paying you to be you. And that's why I say when you start doing hack material or you start doing what I call trending comedy, everybody's talking about licking ass. Well, I'm going to talk about licking ass too. I got a bunch of licking ass jokes. Everybody's doing Trump jokes. Well, I got to have me a whole busload of Trump jokes. When you're doing trending comedy, and you're not doing you, don't get me wrong, if you have Trump jokes, tell them. But that ain't got to be your whole act unless you want it to be. But when that is over, what are you going to talk about? So you have to set your brand as a comedian. So when people see you on a flyer or on the internet where you got a show coming up, they can look and say, oh yeah, this guy talks about this. If they don't know your name, they know your brand. They can look at you and say, oh yeah, this guy talks about this. He's funny as hell. I love this guy. Let's go see him. So, but if you're all over the place telling everybody's jokes, then I don't know who you are. I don't know what you're about. I bring up the name Corey Holcomb a lot because Corey to me is a definitive comic. If I say Corey Holcomb, if I say TK Kirkland, if I hire those guys, I know what the hell I'm getting. They're not going to come on and do something different than what I hired them for. Whereas you have comics that are what I call trending comics. I hire you in April. The show ain't until October. A whole bunch of trending stuff is going on. Now you a whole nother comic. You're not the person I hired. D'Militant is D'Militant for a reason. I always had these views, but I was working at a mortgage company. I was making 6 figures a year. Well, good 6 figures. Wearing silk. The clothes you see me wearing on my show, Comedy on the Edge, which is on Tubi. I was working at the mortgage company then. Those were my suits. That's the stuff I bought. Hey, it wasn't no wardrobe or that. That was my stuff. So, but yet I was talking from a left-wing radical point of view, and it was hit and miss because when you set up your brand, you have to look like what you're talking about. If you're the girl who wants to talk about how sexy you are, you can't come up there in clothes that do not reveal your curves. If you're a woman who wants to go up and just talk about whatever you want to talk about, your family, your kids, school system, the government or whatever, do not go up there looking sexy. Because we're looking at your body, we're looking at your butt, we're looking at your breasts. We're not listening to you. So that's why the older female comics, Moms Mabley, LaWanda Page, who when they're in their youth, look good. Phyllis Diller had a shape like a goddamn hourglass, man. But who knew it? Because these women dressed down. So you would listen to the jokes. You weren't paying attention to how they looked. You weren't thinking, man, I'd fuck Phyllis Diller, shit. You wasn't tripping that. That's why she had on a muumuu and that crazy hair and a long cigarette holder. She made herself look like a clown so she could entertain in a clown's profession. A lot of comics want to look cool. We're not a cool profession. Overall, let's be honest, most comics are not attractive looking on the open market. I'm not saying overall that we're 100% ugly, but we're like politicians. Kamala Harris looks good as a politician. On the open market, she all right. Mm-hmm. You know, you're not gonna turn her down, but is anybody gonna rush to the end of the bar for Kamala Harris? Who else was like that? There have been enough. Michelle Obama. Come on, was she fine? Was she in the political world? Yes, these are good-looking women. But in the open market, y'all all right. You cool, but you ain't knocking it down like some of the women that we're seeing in movies or models and all that. Ain't no supermodels in comedy. Lately, we have more attractive women than in the past. I will say that. But comedy does not attract good-looking people overall. We're the area of jesters. We're supposed to entertain people. And most comics are, frankly, a lot of people are gonna be mad when I say this, but it's the goddamn truth. We're lazy. We really don't want to work regular jobs. Let's face it. You found out you were funny. You found out people are paying for you to be funny. So now you want to get paid to be funny. I ain't got a problem with it. I do it. I've been doing it for over 30 years. I've done real work. I've worked with contractors. I've done street sales. I've done, like I said, I work with a mortgage company. I sold real estate. Boy, is that a hard one. Got to please everybody, the buyer, the seller. Oh, this person don't like this. Don't play the radio when you drive them to see the house. I mean, there's so many rules in the real world. I was a janitor at the Boston supermarkets. I used to clean toilets. So I've worked real jobs. So I understand. When I found out people was paying to go and tell jokes, you couldn't get me in that line quick enough. What? Tell jokes? I thought it would be the easiest thing in the world. And it's actually one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. But it's the thing that I love, which makes it not hard. To be a good comedian, to last, let me say that. To last, you have to diversify. You cannot rely on, I just tell jokes and I'm funny as hell and everybody's gonna just have me telling nothing but jokes. That's cool, but how long is it gonna last? Look at the kings of comedy. I love this example. 4 original kings of comedy. How many of them are doing stand-up right now? And we have to take Bernie out because Bernie's no longer with us. The 3 remaining kings of comedy, who's doing stand-up, recognized as being one of the best stand-ups. We recognize, right now, we're recognizing Dave Chappelle as being pretty much about the best right now. And Chris Rock's name is still bandied around and so forth. But nobody says DL is the best stand-up right now. DL's on radio. DL's a damn good comic. He's a damn good stand-up. But when you say the greatest comic living right now, nobody mentions him. Cedric is a sitcom and movie actor. Damn good, but he ain't out there where he's known as the best stand-up right now. He does, both of these guys still do stand-up, and both of them can still pack a room, pack an arena or whatever, a theater, and kill, because they're both talented guys. But these are the kings of comedy. How come they ain't out being the kings of comedy? You get my point?
Mhm.
Steve Harvey is everywhere. He's on radio. He's doing game shows, doing talk shows, getting in trouble, getting called a coon. He's doing everything but stand-up comedy, where everybody's running to see the next Steve Harvey stand-up. That's been taken over by other people. And don't get me wrong, it's been 20 years, but Richard Pryor was still an attraction as a stand-up until the day he died. George Carlin was still an attraction as a stand-up until the day he died. Joan Rivers was still an attraction as a stand-up until the day she died. We don't do that. We now, the new generation, we are transitioning to other stuff. I started off as, I'll use me as an example. I'm not throwing no stones. Heck, my house is made of glass too. I started off as a stand-up, but it is hard to maintain a stand-up schedule. I was doing, I don't know, maybe 270, 300 shows a year, constantly at the airport, flying back and forth, rent-a-cars, buses sometimes if the place was really remote, trains. That can wear on you, and that can wear on your performance because you're traveling so much, different hotels, you get sick here, you get sick there, food conditions. So that's what makes doing stand-up hard, is because the wear and tear it takes to do it. If you could just stay in one spot and do stand-up, hell, you could do it for 100 years. But it takes a lot out of you physically and mentally. If you have a family, if you have people that you care about or whatever, you're gone a lot if you're really doing stand-up. So I became a writer. I concentrated on writing, integrated that in more, integrated producing in more. I was doing all this stuff the whole time, but as the stand-up fell off, the producing and the writing picked up. So my bank account never saw a dip. You know, it wasn't like I walked into the bank and like, oh, here comes a deadbeat. No, I was pretty much able to maintain the same lifestyle that I had. I just had to adapt and do it a different way. I got a webinar that, this is what I want to do for your audience. I have books, I have CDs, I have a webinar where I teach comics how to make money while they're asleep, passive income. And what I want to do for your audience is go to my website, which is funnylit.com, FUNNYLIT.com. When you go there, go to the top and it'll say, I got different categories: books, speaking engagements, audio, video, and all that. Go to books, scroll down past all my books. If you don't want to buy one, don't, but scroll down past all the books. It'll say collector's edition calendar, and take that link and you have a calendar, which is not a yearly, it's a yearly calendar, but it doesn't deal with the days like that. So in other words, the calendar of 2020 is the same calendar of 2022, 2025, 3030. It doesn't matter how long you live, that calendar is good, and it's got all the entertainers in it and their birthdays and all that, and it's got a cool soundtrack, and that's a free gift that I want to give to your audience for listening to this. So go to funnylit.com, go to the category books, scroll down to that collector's edition calendar, and just take that link and put it on your phone and put it in your computer, and you always got a cool calendar and some cool music. So yeah, so that's why I got into comedy history, because I don't want, the main reason I got into comedy history by not seeing Black comics know our own history and our fundamentals, but because I knew it was going to come up, that somebody is going to write about Black comedy. It's going to happen. And I would prefer it be somebody like me or somebody that looks like me instead of some white guy who approaches it from a white point of view. If you really don't know the ins and outs of Black comedy, you can only approach it from pulling articles off of Googling articles and all that. You're not getting the real story, because it's just like me writing something about Asian comedy or Mexican comedy. I can study it, I can give you facts, but I can't give you the life that's lived of a Mexican comic. There's just certain things that I miss. Black comedy, I ain't missed nothing, because I've been on the road with Black comics. I've been around Black comedy. So my voice when I write about it is authentic. I've got a book about female comics. My voice is only authentic in the comedy part. My wife did the interviews because she knew what to ask women about being a female comic. I didn't really know. I know the basic crap. How does it feel to be a female comic? Do you have problem with guys? This, that, and the other. 3 or 4 basic dude knowing questions. But other than that, women know what it's like to be a woman, and I don't. So that's why I had my wife do the interviews, and we have full credit on the book. She did a great job.
Definitely. I've been on the funnylip.com website. I actually ordered one of the books, Blacks on Black Comedy. So I'm waiting for that to come in. So before we end this, do you have any words of motivation for those that's trying to break into comedy? Because you gave a lot of jewels. You gave a lot of jewels. No, you definitely did. And this is something I'm gonna remember for a lifetime. So damn, I just really appreciate all of that. You talked to my pops, and he really needed that. And my mom, she's a comedian as well too.
No problem. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, we actually went to comedy school, Virginia Beach Funny Bone Comedy School. And for those that's listening, it don't teach you how to be funny, it just teach you about stage presence and how to get everything.
How to move the mic, how to hold the mic. Yeah.
That's something that you're born with. And
right.
something that you're born
you know
with.
how to move. You know how to move a piece of metal from in front of you, but they teach that. Yeah.
And what's crazy is I used to take improv comedy acting classes at this place called the Performance Playgrounds, Black owned. It had Marlon Hargrave and a guy named James Pop Cooper. It's $5 a week, $5 a class every Thursday from 8 to whatever time we got out of there. And what you just said, it's the same thing they was preaching to us as well too. You have to not just only do stand-up, but you have to have your hands in multiple pots. Yeah. You have to expand. It's great to go on tour and see the world and tour and everything like this, but what else are you going to do? And that's one of the reasons why I actually got into podcasting. And now, because watching Comedy on the Edge, Comic View and everything like that, I've actually rolled back into school for digital media so I can actually learn the background of directing and lighting and recording and everything like that. I mean, I got a degree already, but this is something that I needed to do to help me expand, especially doing these interviews with legends such as yourself and Michael Kaya and Nori Davis. And I've had a variety of guests up here, porn stars. I've had everybody up here and just trying to get their insight. So now I'm learning this stuff, and you were one of the reasons actually why I am going back to school. So I started that back in August. So I appreciate it.
Cool. To answer your question, what I would advise anybody wanting to get into comedy is learn the craft. Understand that if you get into comedy, it ain't all glamour. It takes really, if you're trying to get into stand-up comedy, it's going to probably take you about a few years before you learn or get your voice. Nobody used to even tell us what getting your voice was. So that's why I try to cram as much information in as I can. Maybe it won't take you that long because now you know what you're looking for. You're looking for, when I get on stage, number one, you want to either look like the statement you're trying to make, or you want to say a statement right off the bat to let people know who you are. Roseanne Barr, Roseanne Arnold, whatever, was a housewife. And she let you know it by her look when she came on stage. And then I think her first line, she said something about the kids are in the car or something like that. So you know everything after that, where it's coming from. If I walk up there in a Klansman outfit, everything I talk about better be hatred, because I'm wearing the uniform of hatred. So you know where I'm coming from even before I open my mouth. It's just, what am I going to say about hatred that you ain't never heard before that'll make you laugh? And don't get me wrong, I knew a Jewish comic that could go up and tell racial jokes. Man, people would be on the floor, dying laugh, because he hit everybody. Mexicans, Jews, because here's the deal. When you talk about, when you go up and do what some people call offensive comedy or unpopular or racial comedy, do yourself first. I could go up there and do 10 black jokes and I can talk about everybody I want to. That's the rule. As long as you attack yourself first, then it's open game. But I can't go up there and start talking about transsexuals right off the bat, because I haven't even talked about me, and I'm not part of the club. I'm not transsexual. If I was, I could walk up there and that could be the beginning of my act, and then I could break everybody else down. So when you go into comedy, what you want to do is decide, what kind of comic do I want to be? Do I want to travel? First ask yourself, who am I? What kind of person am I? Because if you like to travel, heck yeah, you can travel and stand up. If you want to stay home, there's opportunities in comedy where you can be a writer, a producer. You can stay home. You can write for other people. You never have to get on a boat or a plane if you don't want to, and you can make a ton of money in comedy. So you have to figure out, what kind of person do you are? Are you a homebody? Do you want to travel? What are your morals? You have to understand what your morals are. What are you willing to do for comedy, and what are you not willing to do? You don't want to make these decisions at the spur of the moment when you're approached with it. You want all of this stuff to be part of your DNA. You know what kind of person you are. If you're the kind of person who would trade their sexuality for money or advancement, then come to Hollywood. They're going to ask you, and if you ain't got a problem with it, you can do it. But if you're the kind of person who does not want to make any kind of compromise whatsoever for your career, understand, when they approach you for this stuff, stick by your guns. No means no. And you will get the reputation of that. Don't get me wrong, it'll cut you out of some stuff, but it'll also point you in the direction of the people you want to work with. Never change who you are thinking that's really going to benefit you, because the scenario is this. If you think you're going to go in there, male or female, and do sexual favors for people, and they're going to keep you forever, it'll maybe get you that job, it'll maybe get you on that show, but that don't mean, it'll maybe even get you in the movie, but that don't mean you're going to be seen in the movie. Your scenes may be cut out. You get on the show can get canceled, or they can write your character off. Oh, there's a tour. You gave some head to get on the tour. Hey, what do you know? The headliner wanted to go another direction. Nothing I can do. I pushed you. There's no guarantee that when you make these compromises and trade-offs to work, that it's going to work out for you. And I'll go back to the story, and then I know we got to wrap up. They wanted, Mitzi Shore of the Comedy Store wanted to call me Whoopsie Wooly, and she would have made me a big star. And it rushed through my head when she said big star. I pictured the mansion and Dalmatians and Corsos, and, all kind of dogs and security and all that, and fancy cars and Lamborghinis and Aston Martins and all that in the driveway. But then she said, but I'm going to call you Whoopsie Wooly. All that went up in a puff of smoke, because within milliseconds, I saw that, okay, Whoopsie Wooly could get a TV show, could get movies, could get a big following, could have mansion parties, he could have a yacht. But as soon as that goddamn gimmick ran off and somebody said, that nigga's a coon, and everybody said, you're right, that would be it. No black friends, no white friends, nobody. You walking around your mansion, feeding your dogs, trying to bite your coon ass because nobody wants you. So you can do stuff in the short term that long term will end up fucking you. You don't want that. You want a career where you can look and say, Not that I did it all myself or anything like that, but a career that you can live with, that you can be proud of. And even the stuff you didn't get, you can look and say, yeah, but if I had done this, I could have got it. And I wasn't going to do that. And I wouldn't do it today. So if you're going to get into comedy, know what kind of person you are and know what kind of comic you want to be. Do you want to be on TV? Do you want to be in film? Do you want to do the road? What kind of comic do you want to be? And then gear yourself towards that. And now if you're a film, if you decide I want to do movies while you're on that film set, learn. Don't just say your lines, then go back and play basketball away from the sound and all that. No, learn from the gaffers, learn from the grips, learn from the cameramen, learn from the set directors, learn the craft, learn everything there is to learn about movies. Because one day you may not be working in front of the camera, but somebody can say, yeah, but you know what? He knows how to edit. Now you're still working. You don't have to get a day job. You don't have to look at the want ads. You don't have to sell real estate or anything that you're not really equipped to do or that you don't really want to do. If you're on a TV show, same thing. Learn every aspect of television production while you're there, while you're not doing your doggone lines. Same thing. If you're on the road, I was able to come back and put on shows because I watched other promoters. My show on Tubi right now, Comedy on the Edge, I was able to produce that show from the ground up, every aspect, from hiring the crew, getting the director, editing with the director, getting the audience, renting the space, hiring the talent. I did all that myself because I watched a woman named Alice Nikki Johnson who had hired me and Eric Jerome Dickey and other people on our first stand-up. She had a public access show and I watched everything they did. And then I said, okay, now I know how they did it. I'm gonna do it this way over here. So I was a producer before anybody even knew who the hell I was as far as TV. I already had those skills as far as sitting down with an editor and saying, take that out, take this out, add that, put that sound there, add another second to that, take a second off of that because it's funnier this way than that way. Learn your craft. I know comics who know more about basketball than they do about comedy. They can tell you every stat there is in the world. They can tell you they can tell you how they changed the 3-point rule. They can tell you the first guy who ever did a layup. They can tell you every darn thing there is to know. But in comedy, they don't know the goddamn thing compared to what they know there. So my thing is have your hobbies, have everything else you like. But if you're going to be a comedian and you're going to last, because we don't have a union, we don't have bylaws, we don't have dues you have to pay. So there's a lot of people calling themselves comedians who just are comedians in title. But if you look at your tax returns the following year, you have to say, I'm not a comedian. I work at Zodi's, or I work at Walmart, or Zodi's. Wow, that's like 80 years old. Or I just gave away my age. All right, folks, I'm 162 years old. Now you know. But if you're a box boy during the day and you do comedy at night, but yet your box boy money is the money that's keeping you in your apartment and putting food in your belly and paying for your car and your gas, you're a box boy. You have aspirations of being a comedian, and if you keep working at it, you will be a comedian. But right now you have to be honest with yourself and say, I'm a box boy. I cannot run around talking about I'm a comedian, because then somebody's going to say, okay, well, what are your last 10 shows? Or how much money did you make last year? Because if you're going to get an agent or a manager, they're not concerned about how funny you are. How much money do you make? They get 10 or 15%. It don't matter how funny you are. If you only made $5,000 last year, if you only made $50,000 last year, that ain't bad. $50,000 ain't bad, but that's only 5,000 to them. They're not impressed. They're not impressed. So if you're not making 6 figures and higher, they're not going to go out and work for you because it's no money for them. I had an agent, and then I know we got to go.
You good?
I had an agent, and this is when I was known, but I hadn't like been pushed over into the next level league. And I approached this manager who was really hot, and he had Cedric at the time. And that's one of the reasons I approached him, because I knew he was making Cedric a lot of money. And I said, well, I know you have other clients. I'd like to be on your client roster. And he said, well, you know what, D? I like you and I see you a lot. And you are really one of the funnier comedians out there. However, I don't think I can make money with you. And I said, well, what do you mean? He asked me, how much did you make doing comedy last year? I said, well, I do the production for BET too. So my stand-up money, I made X number of dollars. He said, okay. I think I made it was 60,000 because I was doing Comic View half the time. And it was 60,000. That's what it was. I said 60,000. He said, okay, out of that 60,000, I'm only going to make 6,000. But I'm going to have to get on the phone and I'm going to have to work hard. And I can't get you booked, obviously, for 60,000. I get you booked for probably 6,000 a show. But I got to get on the phone. I got to make calls. And I'm only getting $600 on that. Whereas I can sit back and let the phone ring and people will call me. Cedric's making 60,000 a show. So I'm making 6,000 off of him by picking up the phone. So let me ask you, Darryl, what would you rather do? Pick up the phone and make 6,000 or get on the phone and have to call to make 600? I said, I understand. I'm glad you told me. See, I didn't get mad because that was a business education to me. I didn't take it personal that you're rejecting me. You're rejecting the idea of a comic who can only make you this amount of money. So either I raise my price so I can make you more money, or I realize that I'm gonna have to go in other directions to have more freedom and power of my own career. Because if I have to depend on a manager or an agent, see, he could have easily done this. He could have signed me and said, okay, I'll sign you, and never picked up the phone. But then if somebody said, well, yeah, I want to hire so-and-so, but I'm gonna need another act too. Okay, well, I got a guy named D'Militant. He could have piggybacked me, but that don't mean you're working for me. That means then when something come up, you throw my name in there, but that ain't working for me. I work for me every day. I'm working for me right now. When I get off of here, I'm going to go and work on a book I'm working on. Tomorrow, I got to do a documentary I shoot. So I'm constantly working for me, and I don't have to wait for anybody else. I don't advocate that for everybody, but if you want to get into comedy and have freedom in your career, learn all aspects of it, and that way you're never at the whim of. Put it this way, COVID did not stop me. It didn't stop Affion Crockett. It didn't stop a lot of people who were doing other things besides stand-up. I saw Affion Crockett, I guess a few weeks ago, and he said he's made more in 2020 than he did before that. And I've known this guy for 20 years. I did the road with him. He used to be my opening act. Very talented dude, but he found his niche. See, a lot of stand-up comics hated internet comics until 2020, and then everybody had to become an internet comic. I never looked down on the internet because to me, it's another phase of comedy. And if you're gonna get into comedy, to wrap up the question, don't be a dinosaur. Comedy is constantly moving and you're gonna have to move with it. You may think that this way of comedy, the golden era, because my era we look at as golden. The 90s, oh, Def Jam, Comic View, the Apollo, oh my God, what a wonderful, there were clubs on every corner. And that was a wonderful era for comedy. But when that era ended, what you're supposed to do, go in a hole and ball up and die? I mean, I'm not a silent film actor that when they go into the talkies, I can't talk. So now the silent movies are over, my career is done. That's crazy. If you're gonna be a comedian, be a comedian. Don't just be a stand-up, be an internet, be an improv, be all the different ways in comedy you can be. Don't limit yourself because it's a big, beautiful world of laughs. That's all you're trying to do. Whether you do it animated, whether you do claymation, whether you do voiceovers, whether you're doing sitcoms, movies, stand-up, it doesn't really matter. It's all about laughs. So find your niche or your niches, learn them, learn the people that came before you, study them, study what they did, don't rip them off, study what they did and see how you can put your spin on it to take that to a whole nother level. Like I said, I'm a comedy historian. No such thing really exists because people don't care about comedy like that, except now. In the last year, I'm getting ready to do a third documentary on comedy. People are really jumping on it now because it's been around for a while. Everybody wants me to do podcasts now. And everybody basically wants me to talk about what I'm talking about now, which is comedy. This market didn't really exist. And that's what I'm saying. If you want to get into comedy, heck, you can follow in my footsteps. I'm old. I'm not going to last forever. Somebody is going to need in 2030 and 2040 and 2050. I may not be still chronicling Black comedy. I'm gonna be an old man. I'm not gonna lie to myself. I can only do stuff so long, so well. Don't get me wrong. I'm pushing 70. Not really. I just say that because I'm lying. I know I don't look it. I'm lying, but I'm old to the point where I realize that 20 years from now, I'm not going to be doing what I'm doing now. I'm not going to physically or mentally want to do it. So I'm hoping that there's somebody who sees what I'm doing and says, you know what? Because Mel Watkins stopped at Chris Rock. His last book, he stopped at Chris Rock. It was before the comedy boom, it was before Def Jam and all that stuff. So that's why I was able to start at the beginning, go to where he went to, and then go beyond that. And I stopped at Kevin Hart. So hopefully there's some guy or girl out there who sees what I did and what Mel Watkins did, take it to where we took it and beyond. Because I'm not really talking about the internet comics right now. I've done articles on them, but I don't have a book on them. In this book, I do have Just Hilarious and Country Wayne and who else am I thinking? And King Bosch. I have them and other internet comics are mentioned here, and I have articles about them. But the whole internet comedy landscape, I wrote this book in 2019. It was published in 2019. In 2 years, that internet landscape has expanded. So somebody somewhere, hopefully, will look at comedy and say, you know what, I want to be a stand-up, but I also want to write about comedy. So we just keep building and building and building, and that way it doesn't go anywhere. I was talking to a friend of mine. How tall are you?
5'4".
Wow, you look taller on camera, man. I would have thought you were like 6 foot something. Okay, well, this is a good example because you won't be offended. There's a lot of guys, 6'3", 6'4", really tall dudes. Everybody asks them when they see them, do you play basketball? Or have you played basketball if they're older? And a lot of them will say yes. So, I played in college, I played in school, whatever. 100 years ago, none of them would have said that. If I asked you 100 years ago, did you play basketball? What was basketball? See what I mean? So all these Black guys running around that are tall as hell, they would have had no purpose. So comedy is the same way. We're lucky that right now there was a comedy boom. We're lucky that people care about comedy. 100 years ago, if we wanted to do comedy, we would have had to been minstrels. We would have had no choice. I wouldn't be able to talk to you like I'm talking to you right now. I'd have to be talking to you like this. If I wanted you to be able to laugh at me, I would have to do that. I would have to do an act. So if you're thinking about getting to comedy, learn your craft and be grateful it's there for you. I am every single day because I'm free. And when I say that, comedy can free you in the sense of if you rig it right, you never have to have a boss besides the person you see in the mirror. That's your boss. If you get an agent, you get a manager, you get a publicist, they're not your boss. They're your You work with them. They're your employees, actually, because they get a percentage of you. But if anybody fires anybody, you should be the one firing them. Yes. So don't ever feel like you got to kiss anybody's butt. You're the talent, and you're the only one that should ever feel like the win-loss column. And when I say that is, when you get hot, and this is going to happen to you because you're becoming more than a comic, you're going to get hot. People are going to come, oh, Jerome, I love you. But then when things cool off, maybe you're not doing the podcast, maybe you've been on the road a long time, you don't want to do it anymore, you've done enough TV and you want to take a break, they ain't going to be there like that no more. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, man, Jerome, he's old news, brother. Come on, let's go over here and mess with Harry. He's doing shit right now. That's how it is, man. It's what have you done for me lately? And so that's why 30 years later, I'm still in the business. You got guys been doing it as long as me. They just want to sit at home and not continue. Well, man, I'm just going to wait till the clubs open up again. Not me. I didn't do any. I did one virtual show, but I did a ton of interviews and a ton of podcasts. So my thing is, I'm still a comic. I've still got to stay out there. I've written a ton of articles. I write for magazines. Like I said, I'm writing another book right now. So my advice, if you're going to get into comedy, learn the craft of comedy. If you want to pick up some of my books, they'll help you. Or if you want to pick up somebody else's books, but learn comedy. I'm not saying you got to take a comedy class, because as Jerome said, some comedy classes, they're a waste of time. That's why I say if you pick up a book, then you can decide what is good for you in that book or not. You don't have to sit there through a whole course. You can put the book down. If you say this book ain't helping me at all, throw it in the trash. What'd you lose, $5, $10? Versus you sitting there in a classroom and now you feel like my time is being wasted. I'm here for an hour and I'm listening to stuff that common sense. And hopefully I haven't said a whole lot of common sense stuff. You guys got something out of this.
That was a lot of jewels. Like, it's all about like longevity. You know, you just got to expand and go above and beyond, and you got to have your creative integrity and just be honest to yourself, like you were saying earlier, and just find your niche, your own brand. I always say create your own wave, and that's what I've been doing. And you know, you see a lot of comedians doing that, man. Like Kevin Hart's prime example. I remember that show he had on ABC with Faison Love and Keith David. Then that counts maybe after 6 episodes, you saw him going to something else. And he has a book out. He's doing podcasts, and Comedy Gold Mines is one of the shows that I'm actually, you just keep moving. That's what it's about. You know, you just got to keep moving.
Approach your career, because you don't want to look at comedy as a job. It's a career. This is you. This is what you will live and die on. This could be your legacy, or it could be the thing people point at and say you were a loser. So it's up to you to win. I approach it like athletics. Most people played some type of athletic sports in school, some type of competitive sports, even if you played on the playground. When you watch, if you look at television and you watch athletes, they're only going to be athletes so long. You have your athletes that do the long career, like your Brett Favre threw a football forever, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar played until he was like 42 or whatever. But most people's careers, like I said, 10, 15, 20 years, you're out. If you approach comedy like athletes approach athletics, you could be okay. When an athlete is done with his career, he either becomes a coach, broadcasting, or he opens up a business with his name on it, because everybody knows it. If I open up a bar, this Jerry Clooney's bar, everybody knew he had a fight with Larry Holmes, and in which case now we all go to his bar because he's a renowned boxer. You have Charles Barkley, never got a ring. Great ball player, never got a ring. He's in broadcasting. Shaq's in broadcasting. Shaq can't even talk. How the hell you broadcasting? So, or you become a coach. When your career is over in athletics, you can become a coach. Well, we're comedians. It's the same thing. Just because you're not doing stand-up, become a producer, become a director, become something that once the public, and they determine it, once the public has had enough of you and you're no longer marketable to the people who are making money off of you, but yet you still have things to contribute them. Write them down, produce them, direct them, give them to somebody else to do. Never get out of the business because the light ain't on you no more. You know more later than when the light was on you. I know more now than when I was on Comic View or Comedy on the Edge or Def Jam. I know a lot more now, a ton more. I look at what I knew back then and what I know now. It's like I didn't know anything back then. But now that the light is off of me, so to speak, I'm not, in the line of I'm next. I can see so much other stuff going on, and I'm able to participate in other stuff. And what you want to end up doing is, like I said, you want to get paid to be you. Eventually, you want people. Okay, I'm gonna end it with this. Okay. Tom Hanks said it best. No, it wasn't Tom Hanks. My bad. It was another white man. It was Steve Martin. They both look alike, of course. Steve Martin said this. He said, if you don't want to go to the cocktail parties and have to schmooze, and I'm paraphrasing, be so good that you're what they're talking about at the cocktail party. So if you're so good that everybody's talking about you, you ain't got to be there. And that's what I'm advocating. I'm advocating that if you're going to be a comedian, be a full service comedian and be so good that you don't have to give nobody no head. You don't have to put on a dress. You don't have to be part of the gay mafia. You don't have to be part of the Illuminati. And you ain't got a coon. You ain't got to do none of that stuff because your talent speaks for itself. That's it.
Thank you so much. If anybody wants to get in contact with Mr. Darryl D'Militant Littleton, make sure you go onto the website, funnylit.com, check out the books, look up Comedy on the Edge on Tubi, which is free. And I'll be honest with you guys, if you're a comedian, you're Black, especially Black comedian, want to learn Black comedy, Tubi is the best source for Black comedy, way better than Netflix, in my personal opinion. You can also follow me at Rome Funny _89 on Instagram and Twitter. You follow me, I follow back. Make sure you follow the podcast at No I.D Podcast. Like, share, comment, subscribe. Make sure you hit that link in the bio. Turn your notifications on for any type of postings. This is going to be my season finale. As you guys know, I love to push the envelope when it comes to No I.D. This is about giving people their flowers, as well as the ones that I'm giving their flowers to while they're standing. I'm also giving them they're also giving us as listeners, because I'm going to listen to this definitely, they're giving us jewels. And this was nothing but straight jewels. And if you're a comedian, entertainer, make sure that you listen to this episode and you support Black media. That's more important. Black content creators, per se.
Thank you, Jerome.
Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it.
No problem, brother.
Thank you. Take care. You too.